everyone, Miko here with Behavior Analyst Supervisor. Thank you for joining us for our free Wednesday Zoom calls. Here you're watching on YouTube, but you could also join us on Wednesday. If you're interested in the link to these calls to join live, feel free to send us an email at info@behavioranalystsupervisor.com. You can also just check out our Instagram. We post questions every single day on Instagram. We also post the link to our free Zoom calls. Every Wednesday, we go through a different task list item area, such as A1. We'll talk a little bit about that task list item, and then we'll go through 3 mock exam questions relating to that task list area. We hope that this provides an opportunity for you to learn a little bit more about the task list and also dive deep into question dissection. We here at Behavior Analyst Supervisor really focus on providing explanations on why an answer is correct and why it's also incorrect. So we appreciate that you joined us. If you have any questions throughout the duration of this video, feel free to shoot us an email, hit that like and subscribe button for more information. Also, you can always leave a comment and we'll be sure to reach back out to you. Thanks again, and I'm Miko with Behavior Analyst Supervisor. You'll also be hearing from Amy and Kevin. Talk to you soon.
Hey everyone, Miko here with Behavior Analyst Supervisor. Welcome to our free Wednesday Zoom. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, welcome. For those of you who are returning, welcome back. Today we'll be talking about a couple of different things. So we are going to try to get through 2 topics today because last week we did a question and answer which I think most of you appreciated. And so today we're going to try to get through what we were supposed to get through last week and then what we're going to get through today. Let's just go ahead and jump right in then. So I'm going to just turn my camera off because it kind of messes up the YouTube feed. So we post these on YouTube after. If you can ever make it, we'll have the recordings. So let me stop my recording and go ahead and get started. So what we were talking about first is H3, recommend intervention goals and strategies based on such factors as client preference, supporting environments, risks, constraints, and social validity. First and foremost, this comes from section H, which tends to be a section that folks think are a little bit more difficult. I think that's for a number of reasons, but the primary reason I think section H tends to be a little bit more difficult is because it utilizes a lot of different sections. So like this, if you're not well-versed in section B and G, it's very hard to pick an intervention if you don't know what that intervention targets. So H3 in itself is not hard. It's very simple, right? Because it's just you select the goals that the client likes, the client wants to do, the client prefers. You make sure that you're only implementing goals in environments that are going to reinforce the behavior. So supporting environments relates to the relevance of behavior rule, simply means we're only going to work on goals that are going to be reinforced in the natural environment. We know we want to minimize risks. That's why we utilize punishment only after we've tried reinforcement. That's why we, save those riskier or more dangerous interventions for later. We also know that we need to ensure that if an intervention is costly, meaning that there's some financial constraints, we don't use it. We know that if the family is not able to implement it because of religious or cultural or socioeconomic or any other reason, we should attempt to find an alternative. We also know that the goals we select need to be socially valid, meaning that they're going to make a meaningful impact in that client's life. So this is nothing new, right? And doesn't seem that hard. The reason it gets tricky again is because you have to know what interventions we work on first. You have to know, let me let these folks in. You have to know what interventions we work on first. You have to know what DR strategies work for what behaviors. And so though H3 and all of section H tends to be more difficult, know that before you tackle it, you should have your foundation built, and you should build that foundation through studying sections B and G. And obviously I can't talk through all of B and G, but what I am going to do is I have 2 questions that we're going to sort through for this, and then we'll move on to the next one. But let's go ahead and look at 2 scenarios, and I'll talk about how it meets this H3 requirement. So our first scenario, Timothy, I don't know if I can move this. Let's see. Sorry, y'all. Sweet. Put it at the bottom. Timothy is a 3-year-old that enjoys playing with trains and loves nothing more than to do this outside. He lacks the ability to request, has a limited acting repertoire, and does not seem to remain seated for more than 3 minutes at a time. Which of the following interventions should be implemented first? An SR plus, which is just socially mediated positive reinforcement or positive reinforcement procedure that reinforces sitting for more than 3 minutes. Functional communication training that encourages manding for open, a shaping procedure to increase tacting, or use extinction to reduce tantrum behavior. So in the chat, I want you to go ahead and put your answer. So A, B, C, or D. I'm going to explain each one. When you're taking the test, when you're doing mock exams, what I want you to be able to do is I want you to say why each answer is correct or incorrect. So I'm going to model that for you here. That's one of like our biggest tips here at Behavior Analyst Supervisor is you have to apply the knowledge. Flashcards are good for building a foundation, but they're not helpful when it comes to scenarios like this. So you really, really, really need to know how to apply the knowledge. So go ahead. There's 2 answers in the chat. I'm gonna wait till there's 5. There's 10 of us here. So we'll wait till there's about half of the answers in the chat. Well, now there's 11 of us. I'll still go through it when there's 5 answers. So no one's going to see your answers. I'm not going to pull up on the screen. I'm not even going to look. It's just for accountability. So just put what you think. I promise no one is here to judge you. This is a learning space. So there's 2 more answers. Great. We have 5. Sweet. So a couple of things that I want you to be honing in on when you see a scenario like this. First and foremost, the age of the client usually is important. Age has a direct correlation with social validity. So the age of the client really matters on what skills. A 3-year-old, we're not going to work on driving a car. A 3-year-old, we're not going to work on sitting at the table for long bouts of time. A 3-year-old, we're not going to work on like cleaning the house, probably. Picking up your toys, yes. Doing the dishes, no. So that relates to social validity. What he enjoys. So as soon as you see something like that, enjoys, this tells me now we're thinking about client preference. So he likes trains and he likes to be outside. So that is important to remember. He lacks. So these are deficits. Deficits are also important because we do need to, we use the word ameliorate, but we need to fix deficits or make better. That's what ameliorate means. So he lacks the ability to request, meaning that manding might be a good goal. He lacks a tacting repertoire, meaning tacting might be a good goal. He does not remain seated for more than 3 minutes. Okay, so this one right here is a throw off. It's not a big deal that he doesn't sit for more than 3 minutes. It's a 3-year-old. Developmentally speaking, 3-year-olds do not need to sit at a table or even sit still for longer than 3 minutes for a significant amount of time. So that is okay. And that actually eliminates answer A for me because sitting for 3 minutes, I think is socially valid. Any more than that for a 3-year-old is not necessarily socially valid. Now we're thinking about which intervention should we implement first. That anytime you see first, that usually tells me there might be more than one correct answer. So we've eliminated A because we don't need to sit for more than 3 minutes. He's a 3-year-old. FCT that encourages manding for open, a shaping procedure, increased tacting, extinction to reduce tantrum behavior. I did not see anything about tantruming in the scenario, so I would eliminate D. If the scenario doesn't say it, please don't pick it. We don't want to add information. Sure, if he engaged in tantruming, then this would be good, but he doesn't, so we're going to get rid of that. So now I'm between 2. Someone please unmute yourself and tell me, what's the first verbal operant we work on? Mands, great.
Manding.
Good job, everyone. So manding is the first verbal operant we work on, which means B, FCT that encourages manding for open is going to be our goal. Obviously, if this said manding for like dog food, then no, we're not going to do that because it's not socially significant, but it's manding for open. He likes to be outside. Teach him how to request open. We're increasing mands and we're allowing him access to outside. We could also teach him to man for trains. So I just want you to see how all of that works together. There's usually a scenario. You have to sort through it like I did. You should be able to explain each one. Shaping to increase tacting is a perfectly fine procedure. It's just we would work on manding first. So B is our correct answer. Any questions before we move on? Awesome. We'll also have time for questions towards the end. So which of the following is the least important goal for a 1-year-old to work on? Least, if it's on the test, it's usually all capitalized, so it's like more recognizable. Least, accept, not, Those words are usually capitalized. If you take one of our mock exams, you'll see that. So least important goal, toileting, showing interest in others, exploring toys, exploring the environment. So now you're thinking least important. You could also replace that with least socially significant. So go ahead, throw answers in the chat. When we get, I don't know, a couple, we'll go through it. This one could be hard if you don't have kids or if you work with an adult population. So that's okay. All right, so let's go from the bottom up. Exploring the environment, a 1-year-old, that would be socially significant. Exploring the environment doesn't mean being Christopher Columbus or Lewis and Clark or the Vikings when they're, sailing from continent to continent. That just means, crawling around, checking things out. I guess a 1-year-old might be able to walk, so I don't know how old you are when you learn to walk. It's somewhere around there, right? Between like 9 months and a year. So exploring the environment would be good. Showing interest or exploring toys would also be good. That's age appropriate for a 1-year-old. The more toys you start to explore, the more reinforcers we can start to establish. Showing interest in others also seems important to me, as this is going to create a sense of reinforcement because others reinforce our behaviors. 1, toileting. There is an argument that can be made, but usually toileting, all of the research shows that females are toilet trained prior to males, but even for girls or females, it's not until you're about 2 years old, 2.5 years old when toileting starts. For boys or males, it's usually around 3 years old or 3.5. So this would be a little bit young to start toileting. Certainly I've had clients come to me that have been 1 year old and asked to be toileted, but we have the conversation about how you need to have prerequisite skills. You have to show interest in the toilet. You need to hopefully be able to pull your pants up and down, because if I teach you to use the bathroom, but you don't have that prerequisite of pulling your pants up and down, what's going to happen? Well, you're going to use the bathroom in your pants, or you're going to need assistance. And so we wouldn't do that with a 1-year-old. So A would be the least important. And again, maybe it's important and maybe some families want to, but we're talking about least important. So again, whenever you see least, that means probably all of them could be correct answers, but one of them should be clearly not as important as the rest. Everyone feel okay with that? Awesome. I'm not hearing any questions, so we're going to migrate to the next topic. Again, this was a brief overview of section H. Just H3. If you have specific questions, you can always shoot us an email. I'll also try to throw in some more H questions as we go, because I know that's a section that a lot of people struggle with, but I want you to remember H isn't the issue. B and G are the issue, because if you're not super fluent in B and G, it's very difficult to do well in H. As you saw here, this is selecting an intervention, but you have to know the different types of interventions. So all right, this stuff is difficult too. C is one of those sections that everyone either loves or they hate it. Measurement can be difficult, and so let's spend just the next 10 or so minutes discussing it. C7 is design and implement sampling procedures. So we're going to spend our time talking about partial, whole, momentary, time sampling, and play check or planned activity check. Play check is simply momentary for a group, so I'll talk about that in a minute. Partial. Now, 90% of you have been taught like partial under or overestimates or whatever you've been taught. I think that's okay to remember, but it's also important to remember that partial overestimates rate, but it underestimates duration. And so I don't necessarily want you to select any of these measurement procedures based on what they over or underestimate. Instead, whenever we're selecting a measurement procedure, you should be considering the accuracy of that measurement procedure. Accuracy is the most important thing. That's why whenever possible, we select a continuous measure such as rate, frequency, duration, and we save these interval recordings, or really their estimates, for when the logistics of using rate, frequency, or duration are not possible. So these are like your last resort, so to speak. And typically when you're selecting them, it's because the question says, pick a discontinuous measure. And then we know we have to select one of these. So partial has a tail that goes down. Again, I'm going to teach you these rules. They're not always accurate. What's more important is accuracy. So I'm going to tell you two things. First, partial is usually to decrease. Typically, not always. So don't like be super rigid in how you select it, but it has a tail going down. It's usually to decrease. The reason for that is if the behavior happens at all during the interval, we mark it as having happened. So when we talk about like measuring a behavior, recording a behavior, or delivering reinforcement, if it happens at all, we wouldn't deliver reinforcement. So that would be reducing the behavior. Whole is usually to increase. There's an arrow pointing up. Again, if we think about like increasing a behavior, we want it to happen for the whole interval. So that's going to increase it. Momentary, I remember momentary goes with multiple. So if there's multiple behaviors, multiple clients, multiple things going on, momentary would be a good measure. In momentary, you can be doing whatever you want. Like I could be typing on my computer, my phone goes off, I look up if the behavior is happening, I mark it as yes or not. Play check is the same exact thing as momentary. However, it's for a group. So if I'm in my class and I want to know is everyone doing math problems, my timer would go off. I would look if everyone's doing math problems. I mark it as a yes, that's momentary. So let's give an example of each. Partial, I'm going to use just the same behavior. So for partial, let's talk about my dog barking. Say I have a 10-second interval. If my dog barks at all during the 10 seconds, partial would record it as having happened. To record it as having happened with whole, barking would need to happen for the entire 10 seconds. Barking might not happen for the entire 10 seconds because you like bark and you stop. So it would depend how you define it. Now, if he's a howler, like he's a lab and I have a labradoodle, y'all have probably heard them bark if you've come to my Tuesday, Thursday courses. But Finley, who's the labradoodle, he has a howl. So he definitely can keep his little howl going for 10 seconds. Momentary would be at the end of the 10 seconds. My timer goes off. I see, is he barking or not? And then I record it. So we just talked about partial for usually decreasing, whole for usually increasing, momentary for typically kind of multiple things happening. What's more important, once again, is the accuracy. So if you're given an interval length, for example, if I'm recording barking and partial is 1 minute and whole is 10 seconds, I might consider whole over partial because whole is going to be more accurate. The shorter an interval, the closer it's going to be to a continuous measure. And that short interval usually is going to produce better data. It depends on the behavior, obviously. Barking, again, if it's a howl, then yeah, sure, whole is good. Barking, probably not, because barking happens for like 1 second and then it's done. And so whole is never going to record barking as having happened for an entire 10 seconds, which is a great segue into my second piece of information. You always, and this is, we usually stay away from absolutes, but you always want to select an interval that is just under the amount of time the behavior occurs for. The reason for that is, if I pick an interval that's over, it's never going to record the behavior. Picking an interval that's under, for example, if barking happens for 1 second, my interval would need to be like 1 second or less for a whole, or else it's not going to record it. For howling, if howling usually happens for 20 seconds at a time, my interval should be like 19 or 18 seconds because that would more accurately record the behavior. So those are our interval recording. I have just a couple questions. We'll probably only get through 1 or 2 because we're limited on time, but I'll do the third one next week. Or if we only get through 1, I'll do the second and third one next week as well. So no, sorry, we don't have this next week. It's Thanksgiving week. The following week, we will be back. So this will not be next week, but the following week we'll be back just due to Thanksgiving. Forgot about that. All right. Sarah is a bit of a micromanager. She spends each hour watching a different employee and writes them up if they were not actively working during the duration of the observation. Sarah uses partial, momentary, whole, or rate. What procedure is she using? She sounds a little bit like Elon Musk right now, if you ask me. We don't post these on Twitter, so I shouldn't get shadow banned. Just on YouTube. Cool, we'll just wait for a couple more answers in the chat. Okay, so first, it seems like the keyword here is she spends each hour, so she's spending an entire hour watching a different employee, and if they were not actively working during the duration, so the total duration of the hour, Sarah marks them as, or she writes them up basically for not working. So you have to work for the entire hour or you're not working. So that to me is whole. That's whole interval. You have to work for the entire hour or you're not working at all. Whole interval. If this was partial, it would say, Sarah, if they work at all during the hour, she does not write them up. So we track the behavior if it happens at all. And then momentary would be Sarah pops into the office every hour. And if they're working, she marks them as working. And if not, she writes them up. And then rate would be like, how many times are you working per hour, which doesn't make sense with this behavior. So whole interval recording is the correct answer here. Let's do one more, and then I'll open it up for questions and just tell you a little bit about our products. Mostly open it up for questions though. Bradley is the administrator of the local high school. Each day, he walks by teachers' classrooms every hour, marking if they are actively teaching. He is using partial, momentary, whole, or rate. Awesome. So this answer to me seems like momentary time sampling. Each day he walks by the teacher's classrooms every hour. So he's checking every hour, marking if they're actively teaching. He's not checking for the entire hour. He's not checking at some point during the hour. So you can maybe make an argument for partial, but again, for partial, he would need to watch until the behavior happened and then he could leave. Here, he's just going by every hour and seeing if they are or not teaching. So that is definitely momentary time sampling. Are they engaging in the behavior in that moment? That's how we remember momentary. So momentary is in the moment. Partial, you watch until it happens. Whole, it needs to be occurring for the entire interval. So that's our interval recording. Let's stop and open it up for questions. I just want to stop the sharing. Let me look at the chat. I think there's a couple questions. If you have a question, you can, let me turn my face back on. You can feel free to unmute yourself. That's totally okay. Yeah, shorter the interval, the more accurate the data typically is. It depends on the behavior though. So like, even if I'm using a 10-second interval with barking, probably not going to capture the behavior all that well. So sweet, no questions? Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I have a quick question.
Yeah, of course.
My question is like how to identify which measurement systems to use. As an example, I know what behaviors we can use the ABC chart, right? Like with increasing, decreasing. Is there like a I don't know, like a how can I say, like something similar to that once it comes to these measurement behaviors? Should we ask ourselves if it's discrete or continuous, like like how to approach it?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So yeah, you want to be looking for is it discrete or not? And what discrete means is that it has a clear beginning and a clear end. So like clapping my hands is discrete. So I could use rate or frequency and be fairly accurate with that. Now, if I clap my hands like this, that's occurring too quickly. Like you're not going to be able to track that. And so that duration might be a better continuous measure. So I think of duration as like a bridge between continuous and discontinuous. Duration is good if your question says words like incessantly. That means it happens over and over, repeatedly or frequently or at high rates. If it wants you to use continuous, which again is more accurate, duration might be good. You always want to use rate or frequency. You always want to use rate over frequency if you can, because rate gives us a better picture. For example, if I say Finley barked 10 times, what's a big deal? Is that 10 times per day? Is that 10 times per hour? Like doesn't matter that much. But if I say Finley barked 10 times in 10 seconds, or per 10 seconds, that's a big deal. That means he's barking frequently. So it kind of just depends on the behavior itself. There's no hard, fast rules, but you do need to look at the scenario, the logistics, and then, what would produce the most accurate data based on what you want to know, because ultimately, right, it's about what you want to know.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Yep. And then if you ever come across like a question and you're like, even if it's not our mock exam, and you're like, why are they using this measure? Just email us, info@behavior analyst supervisor, and I'd be happy to try to give you some feedback about why they might have selected that.
Perfect. Okay.
Cool. All right, y'all, I'm gonna put your names into this random name generator so I can give away something free. We have plenty, you just look on our website, we have plenty of products that can help you study if you're interested. Even if you don't buy something from us, though, we want to help you succeed. So like I said, you can email us. I'm happy to jump on a Zoom call and discuss anything with y'all. The field is obviously in desperate need of BCBAs, so we are here to help people pass their test. So I'm serious. Literally, if you don't buy a product from us and you're like, Nico, I need to meet with you, I'm going to meet with you. I'll also respond to everyone's emails.